Chapter 23. Half-Wit. The entryway was dark as pitch, but as Durant ran into the main hall, the high windows allowed beams of moonlight in, bathing the stone walls in shades of black and blue. His feet pounded on the flagstones as he headed for the stairwell. He reached the steps and ran them quickly, but his boot caught the edge of a stair and he went sprawling onto the landing. Grigori's saber slipped from its scabbard, clattering on the stones. Durant pushed himself to his knees. He heard the front door swing open on its hinges. His fingers found the saber. Quietly, he secured it. He stayed low, hidden from the view by the stone balusters of the stairwell, and crept up the stairs, aware that the voices of the things following him were moving toward the base of the steps. He reached the top of the staircase and pulled the last grenade out of his pocket. He knelt and waited and remembered another set of stairs. David Durant awoke in the middle of the night. He knew there was trouble the moment he came out of his bedroom. Matthew was coming up the stairs, if falling downstairs while trying to navigate them could be called coming up. Matthew crashed back to the landing, and that was the sound that had startled David awake. David glanced toward his father's closed bedroom door, then started down the stairs, his index finger raised to his lips. He let out a sharp shh. Matthew stared up at his brother and started giggling. He repeated the gesture and the sound, which only made him laugh all the more. David reached his side and bent over to get an arm under him. Matthew's laughter stopped. "Uh-oh," Matthew said. Then he started giggling again. At the top stair stood Nathaniel in his robe. "Hello, Papa," said Matthew. David helped his brother off the ground. "It's okay, Papa. Go back to bed. I got him." Matthew had his arm loosely slung over his brother's shoulder. He dandled his brother's hair with that hand and smooched him on the cheek. "Yes, Papa, David's got me sorted right out. Go back to bed. Don't need you for nothing." Nathaniel's face darkened. "I'll not have this in my house, laddie boy. Get out. Now." Matthew giggled again. He did his best impression. "I'll not have this in my house, laddie boy." It sent him into gales of laughter. David tried to quiet him. "Don't be shushing me, little brother." Matthew looked up the stairway at his father. "You'll not have this in your house." Matthew took a small flask out of his pants pocket, languorously unscrewed the cap, and had a deep drink. "You had this in your house for 20-some years, and there wasn't a damn thing me or Davy or Mama could do to stop it. So don't get on your high-as-hell horse and dictate terms to me, you son of a bitch. I worked your goddamn honey company from 9 goddamn years old. This is my house too, and Davy's and Helen's, you fucking old son of a bitch." The sound of his mother's name, drunken tears started to flow. Nathaniel had swallowed all that he planned to. He turned and started toward his bedroom. Matthew's voice bellowed through the house. "Don't you walk away from me, you coward son of a bitch! I'm not done with you yet!" Matthew pushed himself away from his brother's arm. He stumbled up the stairs on unsteady feet to meet Nathaniel head on. The big man saw his son coming and held his ground. "Get the hell out of my house!" Matthew drew even with him at the top landing. His laughter was mocking. "Oh yeah? Is that all I would have had to say to get you gone? I'm guessing Mama said that more than once. I'm pretty sure it got her the same response as this." Matthew's punch was fast and effortless. Perhaps the booze relaxed his body so much that all the power of his legs and hips was released through his fist. It caught Nathaniel flat-footed just beneath the jaw, cracking his teeth between his mandibles. The older man saw stars and stumbled, reaching for Matthew to catch his fall. but Matthew grabbed the front of his robe and twisted him sideways, throwing his father over his hip and down the stairwell. David was there. Later, he saw how he might have reached out and caught Nathaniel, how he might have slowed the descent bodily if need be. But he did no such thing. He let his father flail past. He saw the back of Nathaniel's head strike the stairs below and watched his body slide to a halt. Matthew looked down the stairs and gaped, shaken by his own violence. Durand heard them coming. The talking had ceased, but he sensed them moving through the chateau below him, hunting. He guessed their number at around a dozen. His eyes had adjusted, and he saw a long second-floor hallway stretching out before him with doors on each side. There had to be a secondary way down, maybe to the servants' quarters or to the kitchens, and from there, a way back out into the gardens. He began to regret his decision to climb the stairs, but he banished the thought. This was not a moment for regret. This was a moment for action. He welcomed all the regrets in the world if he could find a way out of here. Durand pocketed the grenade, then slipped into the hallway. Renoir led his depleted companions up the hand-hewn shaft that took them from the well to a round wooden door that had been the lid of a vintner's wine cask before being repurposed. He turned the knob and put his shoulder into the oak. It creaked open on rusty hinges. Renoir shined the flashlight through, revealing a large, empty, rectangular room. The stone floor was covered in dust. Cobwebs hung from the corners. Other than the spiders and their prey, the place had not seen occupation in years. At the far end, a short stairwell ended at a set of doors in the ceiling. Renoir waved Caitlin, Halstead, James, Unger, and Strothman in. He listened at the round door for any sign of their fellows or pursuit. He heard nothing. He closed the door quietly. There was a large steel deadbolt. He tried to slide it home, but it was stuck tight. Merde. Jonah saw the dilemma. He hoisted off his pack and opened it. He found a rifle cleaning kit he had taken from the depot and took out a small bottle of beryl oil. He joined Renoir and dripped the lubricant into the deadbolt's action. It took some working back and forth, but it broke free and they slid it home, locking them in. Unger desperately hoped that it was more about locking other things out. James sat and leaned his back up against the wall. Tears began to pour out of him, and he stifled a cry. Renoir was on him like a shot. He grabbed the boy and put his hand over his mouth. His whisper was savage, and the threat behind it certain. Save your tears and keep fucking silent, or I will silence you myself. Tu comprends? James, shocked, bit his lower lip. Renoir eased his hand away. When he was certain James had gotten the message, he moved back into the space. The ceiling was low, but there was plenty of room. It had been 4 years since Renoir had been here, but it looked as though it had been undiscovered and undisturbed that entire time. He hoped that the appearance from outside the cellar doors was as obscured by time and overgrowth as it ought to be. Renoir crossed to the stairs and climbed them. A thick wooden beam was shoved through the handles, sealing them securely. What is this? Strothman whispered. A fruit cellar. Below the slave quarters of the estate, the slave quarters were raised, but the cellar and foundation remains. How do you know this place? I had many occupations before the war. It was a way station for bringing goods here from Belgium and avoiding the watchful eye of the constabulary. It served me well. I believe it shall again. I hope it shall. again. True, he was a half-wit, but there was no excuse for them calling him half-wit. So he had killed them dead. That was all he remembered. He killed them dead in the center of his family's village in Samaria. And then he killed himself, because killing them turned out to be absolutely unbearable. He hoped Yahweh would forgive him. After all, he was a half-wit. That ought to be a reasonable excuse in the mind of the Almighty. But no Almighty was waiting with a celestial host to welcome him. All that happened was the tear-popping pain and instantaneous regretfulness of slashing his wrists. Then he fell asleep crying and woke up in this new body, a much better body than he had left behind in Samaria, what seemed like moments ago. He stood well over 6 feet tall now, and had strong arms and legs. The body he left behind was scrawny and weak, ripe for bullying he had endured to the point of breaking. But this body, well, this would do. This would definitely do. He was pleased, but he found himself mildly disappointed that his mind did not seem to have improved along with his stature. He started killing straight away when he woke up. He'd found his calling. He used the newfound strength of his hands to kill until he came upon a flagpole that he fashioned into a makeshift spear. He felt like a fisherman, spearing his catches all throughout the burning city of Amiens, and that was when he made his first friend in some time. The little man spoke Aramaic prayers as he killed. That was how the half-wit knew they would be friends. It was the first language he had recognized since he awakened. All the other bits and pieces of prayer and desperation that his victims gave voice to might as well have been the gibberish of monkeys. But the little man with the bloody claw hammer sounded just like home, and the sound of home made him want to kill all over again. They made a great team. When they found the man with the blood-painted hair and the flashing steel sword that razored through the panicking throngs of their victims with abandon, he knew they had found someone they should gladly follow anywhere. And so they did. And although she did not speak the same tongue as Half-Wit and his little man pal, he understood her in ways he had never understood another human being in his entire life. When she tasked him with searching the upstairs of the chateau, he felt warm inside and valued, loved for perhaps the very first time in his life. He hefted his spear and ran the stairs 2 at a time, with little man just behind. Durant heard the heavy footfalls coming up the stairs. He ducked through the nearest doorway and closed it behind him. The click of the latch catching in the strike sounded like a gunshot to Durant, but he knew that was just fear stabbing at his brain. The room had served as a surgical theatre for the German doctors. White sheets had been hung to square off 3 sections of the room into suites where stitching, binding, and amputation could take place with a degree of cleanliness. Each had a metal gurney in the center with side tables set up for surgical supplies. Durant slid the sheets closed on each of them and ducked into the third one. He drew Grigori's saber and waited. Just as the sheets settled to stillness, he heard the door swing open. It hit the wall with a bang. Isaiah Taylor's legs got him into the forest, and he did not slow his pace a notch. His body was strong, durable, resilient. A boy who had spent cropping with his family had blessed him with those traits, a blessing born out of the curse of generations of back-breaking labor. So he knew he had it in him to endure. As his boots grazed roots and rotting limbs, he trusted his hard-earned strength and agility to protect him from what he knew would be a life-ending ankle sprain. Behind him, he heard Durant's grenade go off. He sprinted for a long count of 10 more seconds. Then he paused to assess the situation. He tried to calm and quiet his breath, listening intently while the pulse pounding in his ears threatened to drown any other noises. He heard their footfalls coming, and a memory of running from other monsters in the dark made his body shiver involuntarily. They were talking, shouting back and forth, sounded like nonsense words to him, but in centuries gone by, he would have recognized it as ancient Pictish, language of the Scottish Isles, 1,000 years before they realized they were part of the British Empire. He did not make the decision of whether to lie low or run. His body made it for him. They were coming fast. He bolted and ran for it. They heard Isaiah break from cover, and that accelerated their pace. The three bodies running after him, shouting in their guttural, sing-song language as they hunted, had stripped themselves naked when they rose up. When they stumbled upon a textile mill in Amiens, they took a break from the joy of killing and burning to dye themselves bright blue in celebration of their Pictish heritage. Despite the fact that in life, none of the three had even heard of the Picts or were genuinely descended from them by blood, when they rose in this murderous afterlife, they recognized each other straight off as fellow tribesmen. One body was a German artilleryman, formerly a cobbler's son from Bonn. The second was a prostitute from Amiens, who had been a budding restaurateur before the war stole it all from her. The third was a British Army stenographer from Kent, who had frankly been enjoying the shit out of the war from behind his stenotype at GHQ and in the arms of the prostitute, until last night brought the violence home to him in no uncertain terms. If his mother might have seen him now, dyed blue, covered in dirt and dried blood, running barefoot and naked full tilt through the woods of France, she would have keeled over stone dead. As it was, she had been killed in her bed in Kent by a recently deceased alderman the night before, but that was another story entirely. They had been surprised when they saw the companions cut to ribbons by the machine gun fire at the garden wall. The night before, despite futile attempts at organised resistance, they saw few of their number stopped in the assault. But some of the mechanics of the body seemed to be the mechanics of the body regardless of who inhabited the vessel. Lost legs were lost legs. A lesson all three of the Picts were conscious that their prey must now know. This one they hunted must be clever, so they knew he was dangerous. In some ways that made the chase even more thrilling. After all those years of empty silence and icy cold, the warming pleasure of the hunt was intoxicating. Oh, the cold, it had burned. But not tonight. Hot blood would burn away the memory of the cold, would salve the wounds and bind them up, never to be recalled again, they all secretly hoped. As they ran, they spread out in a widening skirmish line, to ensure that their prey could not split off and allow them to run past. Isaiah was still moving like a shot, but he knew he was running out of room. If they caught him, bent over and panting, they would finish him before he could stand and fight, and Lord knew he was going to take at least one of these motherfuckers down with him. He stopped and crouched behind a tree, calming his breath, listening. He took the hatchet out of his belt and felt the weight of it in his hand. With its smooth, hand-carved wooden handle, it was a light, efficient weapon. He spun and twisted the leather loop at the base tightly around his wrist. Dropping it in the coming fight would be the end of him. Of that he was certain. Right about now, he missed his old pump-action 97 shotgun heartily. But nothing to be done about that. Giving it to the girl had been the right thing to do. And in a life where he had, often as not, chosen to do wrong things, he knew his pop and ma would be proud of the choice he'd made. He heard the running steps approaching and he prepared himself. As they slipped round the tree, Meeting the stenographer Pictish warrior in stride, the hatchet buried itself in his skull and lodged there tight. That was when Isaiah realized lashing himself to the hatchet's handle with the leather loop had been an extreme error in judgment. The stenographer wrapped its arms around Isaiah's torso and squeezed, cracking ribs and eliciting a holler of pain. The hatchet in its head did not hurt, but he could no longer see, and that was disconcerting. But something told him that if he squeezed hard enough, the man would pass out. Then, if he wanted to, he could take the man's body as his own. So he squeezed harder and began the process. The pain in Isaiah's ribs was eclipsed by a shot of electricity coursing through his body in a flood of memories, the sights and sounds, the smells, her face, her touch, her blood, vengeance, and running in the night. Isaiah broke free of the memories. Flooded with rage, he tore the hatchet loose and hammered it into the stenographer's back and shoulders. On the third blow, there was a sick tearing and popping sound, and like a chicken leg being pulled from a hen, the stenographer's right arm popped loose. Isaiah rolled away from the blind, one arm picked, and rose to run. But the others were standing there, grinning and watching. Isaiah let the hatchet's wrist loop spin out. If it got caught in one of these two, and he could not dance out of reach, he was done for. A sinking feeling in his gut told him he was pretty much fucking done for, regardless. He heard the stenographer fumbling around behind him, making incoherent shrieks from his broken head. Isaiah knew there was still a threat there, but the two ambulatory ones coming at him were the certain danger. If that one-armed fucker got back involved, it would be problematic, but he had a feeling that the woman and man striding toward him were very likely the end for him, without a jot of assistance from the third. The restaurateur cum prostitute raised some kind of spear. She hauled back her arm for the kill shot. 500 pounds of monster hit her. A tawny freight train at peak velocity. The lion's teeth grabbed her head, and there was a popping as his jaws crushed the skull and shattered her vertebrae. He shook her once, then dropped the limp body. The German artilleryman picked, hollered his battle cry, but the lion pounced before the guttural scream finished its invitation to fight. It locked its teeth onto his left shoulder and bit down, clawing and rending the man's legs and belly until they were ribbons of dyed blue flesh. Isaiah stepped backward, wishing again in vain for his shotgun. Behind him, the stenographer's working hand swung out, searching for Isaiah, but he ducked under it. As the lion dropped the artilleryman from his jaws, and its bloody maw turned toward him, Isaiah let go of the hatchet and ran. He heard the lion's roar echoing through the woods, and it flushed a last burst of adrenaline into his system. Perhaps it paused to finish the stenographer. Isaiah would never know. But whatever gave him a head start, the lion's certainty that it could have its way with him, or unfinished business with the last pick, Isaiah did not care. He saw one slim chance at life, and he took it. He was running downhill now, back toward the orchard and the chateau. He felt it coming behind him, heard the huffing of the lion's breath, the deep rumble of a growl in its throat. He lifted his knees high, sprinting faster than he ever had in his young life. He made it 100 yards before it was over. He felt the claws catch on his right ankle, and his entire body spun with it as the lion swatted his feet out from under him. His legs twisted, turning his hips, all his momentum now pinwheeling him to the ground. He bounced over sticks and stones, his head whipped back and hit something wickedly hard. Isaiah Taylor saw a flash of light. Then Isaiah Taylor saw no more. Renoir lit a trio of half-burned candles. He heated the ends until the wax began to drip, then set them on the floor. The flickering light provided a small umbrella of illumination in the dark of the cellar. He and Caitlin, Halstead, Strothman, James, and Unger huddled in the pool of light. Renoir opened a couple of tins of Maconochie stew, and they choked down a silent supper. After they had finished, Renoir sat back and rubbed tired eyes. He thought of Francois and Isaiah out there in the thick of whatever the night had brought on. After the Lewis gun had stopped, they'd heard the handful of fragmentation grenades burst in the distance, and then nothing. He knew he was right to fear the worst. "We must sleep," he said. Strothman nodded agreement. "I can take first watch." Renoir's smile was one of resignation. "Camarade, if they come through either door, they are sure to wake us before they kill us. I believe it will be safe for all of us to try to sleep." Strothman acquiesced, grateful all the same. James and Unger were already halfway there, and Caitlin set a pack beneath her head and shut her eyes. Renault snuffed out 2 of the candles to hold in reserve. He left the tallest one standing. As they prepared to lie back, he noticed that Halstead was staring into space, a lost look on his face. "Doctor, you should sleep if you can." Halstead nodded. "Yes, mate. I know it." Renoir lay down. Halstead did not. "You are all right, Doctor." "Believe me, I want to sleep. But if the dreams I had this afternoon come back, I might take this current nightmare over them." Renoir's dreams had been pure horror show too, redolent memories, stirred up and turned on their heads. But he could not keep his eyes open any longer. He left Halstead to do as he chose, and unable to do anything other, he fell into slumber. Renoir woke in terror, sweat-soaked and smothered, as someone tried to stop his mouth with their hand. He lashed out, and then there were other hands grabbing him and holding him. The more he fought, the more there were, binding, choking him. "Sergeant, Major! Sergeant!" Strothman's voice was sharp, insistent. "Arrêtez! Calmez-vous!" The language of his birth cut through the fog, and Renoir began to come around. In the weak candlelight, he saw that his attackers were in fact Strothman and the others, fighting to hold him down. Strothman released his grip on Renoir's mouth, and he breathed freely again. "My apologies. You were shouting in your sleep," Strothman said. Renoir dreamt of home. He'd pray before the war, his wife, his family, his girls. He had not been there when they died, but in his dreams he witnessed it all. The ghost who could not be heard and could only sit frozen and watch it all occur. It had been as real, perhaps more real, than the horror of the past days had been. He wanted to weep with the freshness of the experience, to disremember it all, and he prayed that, as was the way with most dreams, the memory would fast fade to dust. It did not. A banging came at the door. Renoir's pistol was out in an instant. The dream was past, the living nightmare close at hand. Francois's long strides were purposeful. He could not say where he wanted to go, but wherever it was, he meant for his legs to get him there. What he would do once he got wherever there was remained an open question. But as long as he moved with purpose, he would not feel like prey. He had not been prey once in his entire life. He did not propose to pick up the habit now. When he had run 2 kilometers with no sign of pursuit, he stopped and caught his breath. He took stock of his location. It appeared that he had reached the German trenches at the front. Somewhere nearby was the trench filled with the drained naked men. He smelled it on the breeze, a killing floor in midsummer, flesh and offal rotting away. It made him involuntarily gag, and had he eaten, he would have heaved his guts, just as James had at the sight of them. Francois wondered if all those naked dead had risen up with the setting sun. And if they did, was he wandering straight into their midst? As much as he wanted to continue at the unforgiving pace he'd been setting, he knew caution would be required now. He slipped into no man's land, moving as silently as he would on a night raid with Renoir and his fellow legionnaires. He reached the front line of German trenches, and that was when he heard them coming. Francois lowered into the trench. He smelled the pooled blood before his boots dipped into the grotesque stream. It had congealed, mixing with the dirt to form a thick mud that oozed as he made his way through it. Carved into the wall of the trench, just below waist level, were man-sized holes, a modest level of protection from shrapnel for anyone caught in the open during shelling. Francois ducked into one of the funk holes and pressed himself into a fetal position in the mud. He heard them talking to each other. They spoke an African dialect that he did not recognize, but something in the tones made the hair on Francois's arms stand on end. Had he known that it was Imbangala, he would have run. The five of them had not known each other in life, but as they became acquainted, they all realized they had been through the same crucible, warring and murdering, enslaving and selling their prisoners to the lowly Portuguese off the coast of Central Africa for transport to the colonies in Brazil. They had earned their membership in the Imbangala tribe through a trial of blood and slaughter, sacrifice and cannibalization, and in this new life they were loath to give that up. They formed their own squadron amongst the other demons and marauded joyfully, replaying their lives as Nguza warriors over and over as they tore through Amiens under command of the Red Maiden. Most of the men and women they killed arose again quickly and joined the army of the dead under new ownership, but they had not discovered any more of their tribesmen, so they continued to work on their own. By the time they found the British artillery battery en route to the Chateau de Bois, they had gotten tired of straight murder, so they made a mess of everyone there, and luxuriated in spending a few precious hours of darkness impaling and mounting the bodies. They ate 2 of the dead men raw. It was a banquet. Just before dawn, they reunited with the Red Maiden and witnessed as a great Mzungo, in the body of a British colonel, slaughtered hundreds of naked men who had attempted to surrender en masse. He had accepted their surrender and taken it literally. He had his demon men and women slit their throats and bleed them out into this very line of trenches. They had piled them up neatly in a trench, and not a single one had arisen. Then came the sunrise and collapse. When they awoke, the company split up in all directions of the compass. As impressed by the Mzungo captain as they were, the Imbangala chose to stay with the Red Maiden. She had led them well the night before, and so the game began all over. Francois gripped his cutlass and fear rushed through him. He wanted to run. He knew that when they found him, he would never make it out of this funk hole or have a chance to bring his sword to bear. But he did not bolt. He listened to their chatter fade away. He counted to 300 after silence had returned. Then he pushed himself free of the muddy womb. They were sitting on the top sandbags of the trench, waiting. Francois loosed his cutlass and prepared to die. Allahu Akbar. The Imbangala warriors, in the bodies of dead Frenchmen with bayonets in their hands, did not speak Arabic. They laughed and grinned amongst themselves. "Kill him or take him?" asked their Mzungo. "Kill him," said one. The other shook his head. "No, Mzungo, take him. Tease him, torture him, impale him. There are no cities to sack tonight. let us enjoy this one that we have. The Mzungo nodded in agreement and gave the command. Take him. Francois did not have time to swing the cutlass before they had him pinned to the floor of the trench, drowning in the mud and blood.